The next category of prohibitions covers hiring and promotion practices that offend the merit system. The important thing to note with respect to these prohibitions is that almost all of them require a showing of intent. So these are not prohibitions that can be engaged in inadvertently. I'll be giving short examples for each of these prohibitions, which may be misleading because the investigations into these types of allegations are very fact-intensive. The first prohibition is that one may not solicit or consider an employment recommendation that's not based on the employee's work performance or their character. This particular prohibition was intended to remove political interference in the hiring and promotion process. Let me give you an example. A congressman contacts a federal official who's hiring an employee and recommends that that official hire a constituent. That congressman does not have personal knowledge of the constituent's work performance or of their character. That would fall within this prohibition. On the other hand, recommendations from colleagues, from other supervisors at the agency would not fall within this prohibition unless there's an element of political interference. The next prohibition states that one may not deceive or willfully obstruct an employee's right to compete for a position. It doesn't have to be a federal employee. It can also be an applicant for federal employment. Before I give you an example, I'm going to discuss the following prohibition because they're related. That prohibition states that one may not influence a person to withdraw from competition. Let me give you an example. We have a veteran who is at the top of the list for hiring, which means that he's blocking other candidates for employment prospects for this particular position. And the selecting official calls the veteran in and fails to tell the veteran that he's at the top of the list. Instead, he encourages the veteran to apply for another position and at the same time influences the veteran to withdraw his name for consideration for that particular position. That would fall under both of these prohibitions. The next prohibition involves the granting of an unauthorized employment preference. There are two elements involved in proving this particular prohibited personnel practice. The first is the granting of that unauthorized employment preference. The second is that the granting of the preference must be to improve or injure a particular person's employment prospects. Again, this particular prohibition involves a showing of intent. As an example, a preferred candidate, let's say a selecting official, has one particular candidate who they think may be the most qualified candidate for the position. That by itself will not violate this prohibition. Let me give you an example of a potential violation. A selecting official has a preferred candidate for a position. The position is an investigator position. However, the preferred candidate is an attorney. And when the announcement is issued for the investigator position, the attorney does not qualify for the position. The official has the announcement rewritten to include legal requirements such as legal analysis and writing and litigation. This is not something that is needed for an investigator position, and ultimately the attorney is hired for the investigator position. That is a shorthand of potentially a manipulation of the system that would fall within this particular prohibited personnel practice. This can also involve redefining the scope of competition. These particular prohibitions are of those that I mentioned earlier that are very fact-intensive and require in-depth investigations. The next prohibition in this improper hiring and promotion area involves nepotism. For those of you who aren't familiar with nepotism, that is defined as the appointing, hiring, or advancing of a relative into a position. It also involves advocating for the employment or advancement of a relative in a position. So, for example, if you are a supervisor and you are in the chain of command of your spouse, and you direct that the direct supervisor provide your spouse with a bonus, that would certainly fall within this nepotism prohibition. So it goes beyond hiring. It also has to do with the benefits and advantages of employment. The last prohibition under the hiring and promotion area deals with veterans' preference. Now, this particular prohibition, the Office of Special Counsel is limited to reviewing for disciplinary action only. So there are certain veteran preferences that are required by regulation and by statute. If a veteran believes that one of these preferences has been violated, then they need to file a complaint within 60 days of the action occurring with the Department of Labor. However, they also have the ability to file a complaint with the Office of Special Counsel for disciplinary action against the official who is engaged in not following the veteran's preference requirements. An example of that is a veteran's preference requirement may sometimes place a veteran, depending on points, at the top of a list of a certificate of eligibles. These are candidates for a particular job. If someone fails to provide the veteran the appropriate points intentionally to obstruct them from raising to the top of the list, that could be an example of a veteran's preference prohibition.